Hello, and welcome back to the Sussex Ontario Election Show. I'm Joe Ragusa. I'm a partner here and the head of the Ontario Government Relations Group. As we've been doing the last few weeks, we're coming to you with all subjects on matters of the Ontario government, Ontario politics, and the upcoming Ontario election. As we promised you at the outset, we've had different people from polling organizations, from media, from political parties, and subject matter experts to come and talk to you about the things that are important to you in this current climate. We're really happy today to be joined by Rocco Rossi, President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Rocco, welcome.
Great to be here, and I missed out on being Joe Ragusa's stunt double for a remake of Die Hard, and here I am at the Ontario Chamber.
Well, yeah, and I just want to put out there, I said this when Stephen Del Duca was a guest, right in that chair. So Rocco and I are
We've all been cloned.
Yeah, we're not related. We just have 2 or 3 characteristics that might make you think we're related, but we're actually not. But we are really happy that you're here, and I think it's important that you can bring the perspective of the province's business community to the ongoing discussion that we've been having here and with our viewers, our clients, our organizations that are interested in this stuff. So Rocco was named President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce just on January 2nd of this year.
Correct.
And prior to that, many of you will know, Rocco was long-standing #1 at the Prostate Cancer Canada and at the Heart and Stroke Foundation. And Rocco, you also have a healthy or unhealthy amount of politics in your background as well.
I have a few cups of coffee in politics as well.
So this is great, and you bring certainly a well-rounded approach to this, a more holistic approach, and that's great. So let's launch into it. It's August 13th, and we're about 2 weeks out since the Ontario budget was tabled on March the 28th by the Finance Minister, Charles Sousa. The budget does have us return to a deficit situation from balance or even a small surplus. This year's budget will include a $6.7 billion deficit. So I wanted to ask you, how concerned is the province's business community about returning to deficit and this size of deficit?
Well, we're very concerned for a couple of reasons. One, deficits today are taxes tomorrow from our membership's experience, and this budget also includes another $500 million in taxes to small and medium-sized businesses over the next 3 years. And then it's several more years of more deficit, and where the biggest concern, Joe, is that this is late in the cycle. And even if you're a proponent of Keynesian economics, you use deficit financing to prime the pump when things are slow. But then you're supposed to pay back when things are good. And we've led the G7 and the balance of the country in growth, and so should be putting that down so that you have dry powder when you really need it. We're going into a period of significant uncertainty with respect to our trade relationships, with increased competition, with the move in the United States to significantly reduce corporate taxes. So many of the advantages we've been riding on are now at risk, and so now is not the time to double down on deficit.
Okay, fair enough. And I did a little bit of research on various jurisdictions. So Ontario now, its accumulated debt is sitting at around $325 billion. The size of the provincial economy is about $800 billion. So that's about a 38% debt to GDP ratio. Now, appreciating Ontario is not a country, it's a province, but is a 38% debt to GDP ratio necessarily bad or dangerous in your view?
This is the largest subnational debt in the world. I mean, bigger than California, which is a state that has the population the size of all of Canada. So it is worrying because you have provincial, you have subnational debt, then you've got the national debt. So from the standpoint of the taxpayer, splitting it up and saying, oh, not to worry here, at the end of the day, one taxpayer pays for all of them. So you have to look at the accumulated debt, and it does cause us significant concern.
Okay, and that's, I guess, layered on top of what the experts are telling us. There's significant personal and household debt. Now you've got provincial debt and national debt.
And let's remember, part of the reason that is where it is that we have historically low interest rates, which are now beginning to move up. The thing that has saved us from the standpoint of debt, even at this level, is these rates have been so low. And even at these low historical rates, currently just servicing the debt in Ontario is roughly $12.5 billion each year, just in interest. That is the third largest item in the Ontario budget. And think of all the things we could and should be doing with $12.5 billion if we weren't paying down interest.
Of course, healthcare being the biggest expense that the province bears, education being number 2, and you're right, interest on the debt is number 3. So you mentioned a moment ago that governments can go into deficits and debt during bad or challenging times, and the hope would be that as the economy stabilizes and grows, the government would start to pay down that debt. I recall when Dwight Duncan was the Minister of Finance, and you'll recall at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, when it looked like the financial world was about to end, that in 2009, the Ontario government had a deficit in 1 year of $24.7 billion. It was huge. It was federal in its scope and magnitude. And yet, over time, it got reduced, it got lowered, and I'm thinking now, and that was $24.7 billion on a smaller budget.
Yes.
You know, our budget now is about $151 billion. So the world, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you for a second. The world didn't end. We came out of it okay. The province is still standing and not gone bankrupt. So other than the actual principle or the thought of going into deficit is the size of the deficit. So 6.7 billion on 151 billion. Is that as bad as, say, previous deficits have been?
The issue is timing and context. Remember, he went into deficit at a time of incredible financial crisis. And arguably, and again, for those who follow Keynesian economics, those are the kinds of times, you know, we don't have a position that says you should never go into debt. Businesses go into debt each and every day to invest in critical things that are going to help them grow in the future, but they understand that they can't continue to do it regardless of the cycle. And this is our biggest issue, is that you are now piling this on at a time when the interest rates are going up, when growth has been good, and when you want to keep dry powder. And it's not just us, Joe. What's interesting is, you know, the Toronto Star, which has not exactly been known as the pro-business paper, and in its editorial positions, including Martin Reg Cohen's recent column where he said, look, this is a combination of idealism and cynicism. It's good politics, but bad economics. And we echo that because it's absolutely the wrong time of the cycle to do it.
All right, fair enough. So there's been a number of initiatives that were included in this budget, and we were intrigued to see a childcare program that will commence at some point in future, and it will include children from 2.5 to 4 years of age, and of course at 4 years of age they enter the all-day kindergarten stream. So the government's number was that in this city, and we are in Toronto, people on average spend $17,000 per child for daycare. So you can imagine that, you know, that's an average. So some will be paying more, some are paying less. And if you happen to have 2 kids in daycare, it can be quite a burden. I have to assume that some of those people that are buying that daycare, and I say those people because my kids are older, I'm well past that, you know, they're using their credit card to pay for that daycare, or they're using they're paying for the daycare and having to use the credit card to buy groceries. Is what the government has done here just a shift of debt? In other words, saying to families and individuals, you don't have to incur debt for those things because we'll do it on your behalf, and is that necessarily a bad thing?
Most of the people that I know who do use daycare make the choice, are not actually incurring debt, but are two-income households, and so are making the decision that I can make more working than if I stay at home, even with the daycare. Now, daycare is expensive. I'm not saying it's not, and there is an enormous value to encouraging more and more women into the workforce. It's a huge economic expander, but that logic was there 15 years ago, 14 years ago, 13 years ago. The fact that you're adding this investment and asking the rest of society to pay for the few who are making their choices about work and childcare, we just think this isn't the appropriate time. And if it was the #1 priority, why wasn't it the priority 15 years ago, 14, 13, 12, 11, go through the timing? The difficulty in life, as my father taught me very early on, is never the choice between good and bad. Any idiot can make that choice. The difficulty in life is the choice between good and good. No one says these are bad things.
Sure.
It's a question of how are we going to pay for them, and what are the alternatives that we can be spending dollars on. There's lots of good ideas in the budget, and at the right time, in the right context, absolutely.
Well, I mean, and it's interesting you say that. In the polling that we saw prior to the budget and the lead up to the budget, whereas typically and historically, we would see when people are asked, what's on your mind? Like, not to rank how important is this to you, how important is this to you, what's the single biggest issue that you're dealing with right now? And, you know, usually we'd see healthcare being #1, the environment has been #1. Affordability and the cost of living has certainly percolated up to the top or near the top in the polling that we've seen. So when the budget was tabled, I think a lot of us, as we were listening to the minister read it, were saying, okay, so that's about affordability, that's about affordability. So they've challenged, or they've tried to tackle that. Is it fair to say your position is it's good to tackle those things, but when you can afford to do it?
Right. Affordability is also about affordability to government and to the taxpayer, because that adds and that accumulates on, you know, we've seen the impact and the rising of input costs for our businesses. And at the end of the day, look, the vast majority of businesses in Ontario are small and medium-sized businesses. They're your neighbors. They're people who are seeking to generate some independence for their own family and opportunity for their community. And they have affordability issues on hydro, they have affordability issues on taxes, there's complexity added by red tape. And those are the people at the end of the day who are creating the majority of jobs to give people the opportunity to improve their status in life. I mean, you and I are perfect examples of this. Our parents came here with nothing and have been able to build, except a will to work hard, to save, to take care of their families, and have done well. And I'm one of those fortunate winners of the Ontario Lottery, and the OLG has had nothing to do with it. I want that opportunity. Our members want that opportunity for everyone, but we can't ask some to disproportionately pay for it.
Fair enough. What's your view on, we all agree that infrastructure is a good thing and that it has to be government to do it. Even in the P3 model, there's the government is the people who backstop it. Is it a bad thing if a government that would otherwise be in balance incurs deficit, borrows money to build infrastructure that will last in some cases decades? So you know, it's the difference, I guess, between are you using your credit card
mortgage
to buy groceries
or credit card,
or you know, renovate your house.
Yeah.
Is this not a good time, or is this a bad thing in your view?
Look, infrastructure, and there are lots of important infrastructure needs. You know, we, together with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, have long been calling for the need to expand broadband connectivity throughout the province into rural and remote communities. That's infrastructure too. It's not just subways. But as you pointed out, we have a $151 billion budget. So it's not a question of, okay, everything else there is decided, And surely you agree that we would add another couple $2 billion in order to build infrastructure. I would say government has to look at all of its expenses and prioritize, and within the context of the stage of the cycle that we're in, growth rates, what's happening to interest rates, and what our competitive environment is. I mean, we're now we're in a NAFTA negotiations, as we know. We're not sure what that looks like coming out the other end. We know that they have legislated massive reductions in corporate taxation, and it's not simply the levels. The piece that has our members, most interested and concerned is south of the border. The U.S. is now offering accelerated 100% depreciation of capital expense. So if you want to retool, if you want to add productivity software, training, et cetera, you can write that all down in 1 year. Here, depending on the expense, it can be 3, 5, 7 years. So if you're on both sides of the border as a manufacturer and you have to make a decision where you're going to make that investment, guess what? We don't get it. What was the response by our government in the budget? They, both at the federal and the provincial level, they're saying, no, we're actually going to tax if you have too much passive income inside. So instead of encouraging, as the Americans have, we're going to beat you over the stick and beat you over the head with a stick until you invest. That seems poor logic at the best.
Maybe not the best from a competitive perspective.
No.
All right, so we're going to get off the debt, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the minimum wage. So your organization, even prior to you joining, had quite a bit to say about that. And just to remind everyone, in 2017, the province legislated that on January 1st of this year, the minimum wage would rise from $11.40 to $14, and that it would go to $15 January 1st, 2019. I think a lot of the commentary and criticism we saw was not people saying, no, people that work at that level should never get a raise or like that, and that $11.40 was plenty. I didn't hear that. What I heard a lot about was the pace of the change, how much all at once, how quickly, and the amount of time that business had to adapt and adjust. What's the OCC's view on that, and what are your members telling you on that subject?
Well, you've laid it out perfectly, Joe. Everyone wants all of society to benefit from our economy and to do well. And wealthier consumers, it's greater demand, it's greater market, et cetera. But the pace is unprecedented in any jurisdiction in North America of that jump. And being able to adjust to that is not a given. Again, this notion that businesses are somehow all billionaires with private jets heading down to numbered accounts in Panama with bags of cash is a caricature that's laughable. The vast majority of businesses have to deal with tight margins, and if you suddenly increase a key labor component by 21% overnight, you have to expect significant dislocation. It's not just even the minimum wage. In addition, in Bill 148 are a whole host of additional regulations around scheduling, which, again, intent is really right and right-minded. The government wants to be sure that businesses don't game the system and put people into part-time simply to avoid paying benefits, right? So they want to protect part-time workers. I get that. But the blunt instruments that they've created are such that now, if you're a part-time worker who works 1 day in a month that has 1, 2, or 3 stats, the employer also has to pay for the stats.
The statutory holidays.
Statutory holidays. Which now what a lot of our members are doing is simply reducing hours and cutting out days that they would otherwise be there, because it makes no economic sense anymore, because you're doubling or tripling your costs on those days. So how do you make that work? There's a layering
effect beyond the wage itself.
Right. So there's a double impact, and then there's a third, because as it happens, the employer health tax is paid as a percentage of your payroll. So if you've increased payroll 21%, then you add the EHT on top of it. And it was one of the things that we, in our pre-budget submission, we presented to the government, hoping to get some relief, at least take the salt out of the wound of taxing on the increase that you've mandated us to put in. But no, they've actually doubled down and added another $500 million in taxes. So not what we were hoping for.
Sure, understood. Now, you may or may not be aware, but we actually had Doug Ford sitting in your chair on a previous show, and it was actually during his leadership campaign, and he ended up winning. So it's my position that appearing on this show put Doug Ford over the top and helped him win. So having said that,
I don't have to worry about any elections, Joe.
Yeah, I asked Doug about his view on the minimum wage, and he said he'd leave the $14 in place, and that he would not proceed with the $15 an hour next January 1st. But he added, unprompted by me, that those people who are at that income level should be receiving additional help, right. And that in his view, the way to help them would be to have anybody who earns up to $30,000 a year not pay any provincial income tax. At the same time, he is committed to running balanced budgets. So if, as you know, it's a zero-sum game, if somebody's paying less tax, somebody else is going to pay more. So does it mean that in a way that some of your members, those small business owners that maybe don't have to incur the additional wage costs, but have to perhaps help their employees out through their own provincial income taxes, is this just a way of kind of reshuffling the chairs on the deck here? Like, one way or another, we're all going to pay?
Look, I think we need to look at the math, and I think we should also be revisiting the notion of building in inflationary increases of minimum wage over time. So it's something that businesses can plan for and can absorb more easily. Again, the issue is this came in a sense out of nowhere, and all of the pre-expert advice, et cetera, was to suggest that it not be done. It's certainly not done at that extent and that time frame. But we need to have a more predictable model going forward, and that's all our membership is asking for.
Fair enough. So we're going to take a short break now. After when we come back, I'm going to ask Rocco the really hard questions. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Looking to take your digital advocacy to the next level? Get in touch with our team at Sussex Adrenalin. Sussex Adrenalin is Canada's most awarded digital public affairs agency. Using our proprietary advocacy platform, Vox, supporters of our clients' campaigns have sent over 1 million letters to their local politicians advocating for change. Let us help you design your next advocacy campaign and get the results you need to win. Sussex Adrenalin, digital that actually gets you results.
For 20 years, Sussex Strategy Group has helped companies and organizations navigate government and bring about successful policy change. Our team of experts understand that it takes more than meetings and phone calls to turn heads and change opinion. It takes insight, strategy, and deep domain knowledge to get things done. In a world that's constantly changing, one thing stays the same. Sussex Strategy Group helps you win. Visit sussex-strategy.com right now and let us help you today. Sussex Strategy Group, 20 years of getting you results.
All right, welcome back to the Sussex Ontario Election Show. We're joined by Rocco Rossi, President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and I wanted to ask Rocco a question about Pharmacare. So, Rocco, the Ontario government this year started covering prescription costs for young people from birth to age 25, and they recently enhanced coverage for people over 65 who had a drug plan, and there was a few holes in it with deductibles and co-pays, which have now been closed off. Certainly the federal government looks like they're heading in that direction of universal pharmacare. They recently hired Eric Hoskins, the former Ontario Minister of Health, to lead it. Now, I know the OCC has done some important work on this subject. Could you share with our viewers how the OCC believes that Pharmacare should work?
Sure. My colleague Ashley Challenor has led a team and reached out to a bunch of experts to put together really a filter for looking at Pharmacare as opposed to a system of Pharmacare, but what principles would you use to assess it? And I think for us, to boil it down in the simplest terms, what are we actually trying to achieve? And what we're trying to achieve is to ensure that no one falls through the cracks, and that those who most need healthcare, need drugs, will be able to get it regardless of their circumstances. And the issue with universality, and the one thing I would suggest you might revisit is, it's not clear from Minister Morneau. He pulled back on the notion of universality. He said there has to be a Pharmacare system, and I actually took encouragement from that notion, because by going universal, you add significant costs, which then question and threaten the sustainability of the program long term. I mean, at the end of the day, does Ed Clark or I need to have my drugs paid for? I would argue no. And even with OHIP Plus, which politically seems to make a lot of sense, we're going to cover the costs of kids under 25. A whole bunch, high double digits, of those children were being covered under their parents' plan, whether through employment or otherwise. And now you're simply adding that to the tax burden, which again, when, as you've pointed out, healthcare is already the single largest and fastest growing piece of every provincial budget across the country, probably not the best way to go about it. We would like to see something that's sustainable, that saves those dollars to make sure we get to the people who most need it, and have a balanced model that still has private pay. Why take the companies off the hook who are paying into healthcare benefits packages now, or individuals who have the wealth to be able to have extended coverage themselves? Why take that responsibility away from them?
Fair enough. All right. I want to switch topics now and talk to you a little bit about programs for business. So when we had Doug Ford on this show, he was pretty clear in saying he is absolutely opposed to what he calls corporate welfare. So you've seen over the years here in Ontario the Jobs and Prosperity Fund, the Strategic Jobs Infrastructure Plan. I mean, it's right. They're part of the landscape
super
now
cluster
in this province and in this country. In this last budget, the Liberals actually enhanced and extended their programs for business, which puts them diametrically opposed to where the Doug Ford and his party are. Now, you're a business organization. What's the OCC's view on this question?
Look, I think that it's a complicated issue, and that if you look at who we compete with in the world, they're doing interesting things that if you're not in a position to respond, will put your economy at risk. The notion that Boeing, for instance, in the US, is simply a free market company that builds its cost structure and its innovation strictly from free market operations, and therefore, if we do anything with Bombardier, as was being tasked in recent days, in recent months, that we're the bad actors. The amount of money that Boeing receives from the U.S. military, which is essentially a U.S. government program for enhancing various industrial sectors, that's the net impact. If you're not prepared to respond to that in some way, you put yourself at a significant risk. So there are intelligent programs and less intelligent programs. When you think about what Iowa corn farmers receive in terms of subsidies to convert corn into ethanol as opposed to fuel, it beggars all of what we do in agriculture across the country. So, we don't want to be idiots in it, and we want to take the programs, program by program, to get value for money.
Well, and I was going to say that we've done a fair bit of work in this area here at Sussex over the last few years. We've helped a number of companies to secure public sector grants, and we see it. I mean, our clients, some of whom are household names, they show up here, or they share with us materials from the Empire State Economic Development Corporation and some of the southern states that say, oh, we'll give you land, we'll give you wage subsidies, you won't pay any tax, come here, just bring your stuff here and leave Ontario. So I think that probably the magic lies in that, along what you're saying, we have to do it smartly, but I think our federal and provincial governments have to have at least some tools in the toolkit to compete with that?
100% have to.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. So you mentioned NAFTA a little bit earlier, and I know that you're watching the negotiations quite closely. Potential to have a significant impact on our, not only Ontario's economy, but all of Canada. So the provinces are not at the table. The federal government is. Chrystia Freeland is the minister who is representing Canada, and I know David McNaughton's done a good job as our ambassador there, but you're a provincial organization, being the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Is there anything that you think the Ontario government might be doing, should be doing? I mean, the Premier's gone and met with 38 or 40 governors. What would you like to see your provincial government do, given that cloud of uncertainty around NAFTA?
Look, I want to give huge kudos to the Premier on this file and on the work that she has done personally to go to every state capital that will have her and to build, including very recently, an MOU with the governor of Indiana on how to enhance trade between Ontario and Indiana. It's true, this is a federal jurisdiction, if you will, but Ontario is the single largest contributor to the import-export market in Canada, and so we have, while Canada is the #1 trade partner for the U.S. And for most states within the U.S., Ontario alone is the #1 trade partner for over 20 U.S. States just on its own. So we at the Ontario Chamber have also been signing joint memoranda and joint proclamations with the California Chamber of Commerce, with Colorado, with Kentucky, with Wisconsin just yesterday.
Oh, great.
And so we encourage that and are delighted that the Premier has made that such a centerpiece, because in speaking to Ambassador McNaughton recently at a talk that Ambassador Clark, from the U.S.'s ambassador to Canada, there has really been the creation of a Team Canada, and to rip off a phrase from our friends at Canadian Tire, we all play for Canada when it comes to trade. And I think building those local U.S. voices to remind the President how important trade is, how integrated our economies are, is an important part of the negotiation. What we've been less thrilled with was the response to, and absolutely we believe that the governor of New York is wrong-headed in having Buy America, but we don't believe, when the eye should be on the prize of NAFTA, of creating noise aside from it and doing tit for tat at the state and provincial level unilaterally. We really believe that we need to stay within the Team Canada confines and continue to do that great proactive work which the Premier has been so tireless at.
And without giving anything away, given that you lead a major business organization, anybody from either the provincial or federal governments talking to you about contingency planning in case NAFTA does get blown up and stops being enforced?
Look, I think that the kind of contingency planning that's been going on, which is totally understandable, is actually the moves that the federal government has been making in the signing of the Canada-Europe free trade arrangement, with CETA, with TPP, with the work that is now being done in Latin America and elsewhere. for as long as I've been conscious of public policy from a young age, Canada has talked about the need to diversify our trade. And win, lose, or draw on NAFTA, and I remain a huge optimist because the trading relationship is of such great benefit to all sides, and so I think that we will renew. But win, lose, or draw, we understand that we have to build relationships and partnerships in the rest of the world, and it's really been an easy default to market to the world's largest market. Now we got to work and we got to hustle a little more.
Earn it a little more.
We got to earn it a little more, but it's there to be had, and people want to trade with Canada.
Well said. Okay, so in the time we have left, I want to talk to you a little bit about the election. The election is just, the beginning of it is just a few weeks away. Voting day is June the 7th. So given that we're on the cusp of it, Rocco, what issues or subject matters does the Ontario Chamber of Commerce really want to see addressed during the campaign period?
Great. Well, we've put out and we've given it to all political parties, and we're encouraging all 135 of our local chambers from one corner of the province to the other to present our Vote Prosperity platform, which is a series of ideas that range from infrastructure investments to tax that we believe will help support growing prosperity in Ontario. But if you were to boil it down to one area that we particularly want all parties to be on the record on, and it's the area that 77% of our membership, the number one issue that they point to as the key obstacle to their own future economic prosperity of their companies and of the province, is the skills mismatch. We have a rapidly changing world, and we have an education and training system that isn't keeping up. And that is no single actor's responsibility. It's actually one where business has to come forward, educational institutions have to come forward, labor unions have to come forward, the government have to come forward, not-for-profits, immigrant settlement. All of this has got to be a part of the skilling and reskilling agenda for Ontario. Because whatever country, whatever jurisdiction figures out how to have their people fulfill their potential throughout the lifetime of work is the jurisdiction that's going to win economically.
Interesting. Well said. So if you could submit one question, we're going to have apparently 1 or 2 or 3 or some number of televised leaders debates during the election campaign. If you could submit a question that the moderator were to ask, would it be about the skills? What each of the parties would do?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do to ensure that we can reskill those who are dislocated by the change that's going on each and every day, and so that we ensure that our young people are coming to the market with the skills they need to succeed, and that business needs from them to succeed? Because we've got lots of jobs seeking people and people seeking jobs, and there is that mismatch. You know, one of the things, and part of it is, look, a big part of it is our own creation. As a kid, my parents, and I'm sure it was no different in your household, Joe, but my parents said, look, we came to this country and we were prepared to work with our backs so that you could work with your heads. I want you to go to university. I don't want to see you picking tobacco. I don't want to see you pouring concrete at the job site. Those were the jobs we had to do. And similarly, we've got an educational system where 90+% of all the guidance counselors, whether it's the public school system or the separate school system in this province, are graduates of universities, not of colleges, not of trade schools. And so think about what their framework is and what they're presenting to our kids. And as I grew up, it was always, well, you know, the smart kids go to university, then the people down below a level go to colleges, and then the people, well, let's hope we can get you a trade. and my plumber can buy and sell me 4 times over. And there is desperate need. When you consider we've got an aging nuclear reactor fleet that's being refurbished, Bruce, Darlington, Pickering, tens of thousands of job years, billions of dollars, and then add on top of that all of the infrastructure expending, rapid transit and internet, et cetera. The need for trained people, not just programmers and coders, but welders, carpenters, framers, bricklayers, plumbers, boilermakers. We need to show our young people that there's a whole world out there of great prospects where they can lead very productive, fulfilling lives, so long as they're shown the full panoply of choices in front of them.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I hope it comes to pass, because that list of sectors and organizations that you mentioned, companies, organizations like yours, labor unions, post-secondary educations, not-for-profit organizations, I feel that in the last little while, and this is not a political statement attributable to any party, but I feel like we used to have more of that, and as our politics and our government has become more polarized, it's binary now. I'm thinking of what we talked about, minimum wage,
right?
The OMB reform, rent controls. It seems like it's
winners and losers, us and them.
Either we're going to make business happy, or we're going to make people happy, and you win, you lose, and I think that might be a reflection of kind of how our politics, and you referenced growing up. I grew up at it, Bill Davis, hug the middle, never
boring
let it go.
Is good.
Boring is good. Even Brian Mulroney. I mean, these are progressive conservatives, but I don't think anybody would accuse them of being right-wingers. Jean Chrétien, I don't think anyone would accuse him of being an extreme left-winger. And there seems to be this kind of vacuum in the center where maybe there's not enough votes there. I don't know. But it seems that if you're really comfortable there, you have fewer choices. And it seems to me that as we go about our work and you go about your work, I kind of have this nostalgic feeling that what you're talking about now to address the skill shortage is more what we used to do. And there's not as much of it going on now. And I think we need government to take a leadership role, organizations like yours to take a leadership role, and maybe herd these cats and say, look, you represent business, but if your members have no customers or unhappy customers, that's not good for anybody. So, let's have a rising tide that lifts all boats.
For sure. And the other thing, Joe, is look, the pace of change and the competitive nature of the rest of the world has not only made for this being not just aching back for nostalgia, but this is the only way we're going to solve the really complex problems that are facing us. There aren't simple answers to the truly important problems that we face. They're ones where each of us have got to put a little water in our wine, work together, because the competition is not within our borders. It's outside our borders to us. And the dislocations are happening not because work is going to being outsourced to Bangladesh, but because technology is disrupting so many jobs. How are we going to give people the future in that and creating tons of jobs at the same time? So we've got to be smart in making that match happen. And this year, each year, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce does an Ontario Economic Summit, a 3-day confab in Niagara. And this year's will be focused on this, and we'll be bringing and inviting people from all sectors to participate, not in a talking head session, but in really building practical solutions to the problems facing us.
And we do have some reason for optimism. I think certainly in this city with Google and Sidewalk Labs and making the playoffs for Amazon's second headquarters and the Kitchener-Waterloo area, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. So we're tracking.
Right, but again, I want to stress, and it's so important because the bright shiny object is IT, is Amazon, Google, et cetera, but traditional businesses are also evolving. It's not about just creating the next IT unicorn. I just came, I was in Leamington yesterday, and I went into a greenhouse operation. And the amount of data analytics, of probes, of computer programs, of advanced marketing techniques. Agriculture isn't a guy behind a plow anymore, right? It is
Green acres.
It is, yeah. It is. It has been affected by technology, and the jobs that are available there are really quite exciting. So we've got a whole bunch of pieces, and there's no better place to start from than right here in Ontario.
Well, hopefully after the election's over, regardless of who wins, I would look forward to a constructive dialogue between government, the business community, organized labor, post-secondary educational institutions, not-for-profits, because we really are in this together. I mean, we're all we need an economy to be strong in order to pay for this health care and all these wonderful things that governments put forward.
We all play for Ontario.
Right. Well said. And on that note, I can't possibly top Rocco on that one. So Rocco, thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy. I'm sure that everyone who saw this or will see this will benefit from hearing your insights. To those of you who are watching, thank you again. We'll be back next week, and stay tuned.